A baby's cry echoes off concrete walls. January 15, 1987. Cell Block D, Polesmoor Maximum Security Prison, Cape Town, South Africa. A mother gives birth on a thin mattress on a cold floor. No doctor, no hospital, just a prison nurse and iron bars. The baby boy takes his first breath behind locked doors, his first view of the world, a ceiling covered in rust and despair. This child wasn't supposed to survive. He wasn't supposed to succeed. He definitely wasn't supposed to build a $500 million empire. But 28 years later, he did exactly that. This is his story. Before we continue, this video explores themes of incarceration, poverty, and systemic inequality from an educational perspective. The story demonstrates extraordinary human resilience and entrepreneurial achievement against impossible odds. All facts are documented from verified sources and interviews. They called him lucky, not because his life was fortunate, because surviving his first night was luck itself. His mother, Nomsa, was serving 8 years for theft, stealing bread to feed her other 2 children. South African law at the time allowed pregnant inmates to keep newborns with them for the first 18 months. After that, the state decides the child's fate. Lucky's fate was 18 months of fluorescent lights, metal bars, and the constant sound of doors slamming shut. Polesmoor Maximum Security, built in 1964, designed for 3,000 inmates, held 8,000, overcrowded cells, violence, disease, and now a newborn baby. Nomsa tried to create normalcy in 6 feet by 8 feet of concrete. She folded prison uniforms into makeshift diapers, used torn sheets as blankets, sang lullabies while other inmates screamed through the night. Lucky's crib was a cardboard box from the prison commissary. His mobile was shadows cast by security lights through the bars. For 18 months, that cell was Lucky's entire universe. He learned to crawl on concrete floors stained with decades of despair. His first words weren't mama or dada. They were shouted commands he heard guards yell daily. Lockdown, count, lights out. A psychologist who visited the prison later documented this in a case study. A toddler who thought metal bars were normal, who thought everyone lived in cages, who had never seen the sky. Month 17. Nomsa knew what was coming. In 30 days, the state would take her son. Foster care, maybe adoption if he was lucky. There's that word again. More likely, a government children's home where kids like him disappeared into the system. She made a decision that would change everything. She wrote a letter, 1 page, to her sister Grace, who lived 400 kilometers away in a rural village outside Johannesburg. The letter said 3 things. His name is Lucky. He was born here. Please give him a different life than this. Grace arrived on Lucky's 18th month birthday. The handoff happened in the prison visitation room, through protective barriers. Nomsa held Lucky for the last time, whispering something in his ear that only they would ever know. Then she handed him through a gap in the partition to Grace. Lucky cried, reached back toward his mother. Grace carried him out through 7 security checkpoints, each locked door closing behind them. When they finally stepped outside into blinding sunlight, Lucky screamed. He'd never seen daylight, never felt wind, never experienced space without walls. At 18 months old, he was experiencing freedom for the first time, and it terrified him. Grace took him to her village, Lithabo, population 800. No running water, no electricity, dirt roads, homes made from corrugated metal and hope, but it had something Polesmoor didn't. Sky, space, possibility. And if you're thinking this is where the story gets easier, it doesn't. Drop a comment and tell me, if you were born in a maximum security prison, do you think you could overcome that start? Because what happens next will challenge everything you believe about destiny versus determination. Lucky's first years in Lithabo were survival mode. Grace worked as a domestic helper for a white family in Johannesburg, a 4-hour commute each way. She'd leave at 4 a.m., return at 10 p.m. Lucky was raised by the village, fed by neighbors who barely had enough for themselves, wore donated clothes 3 sizes too big, slept on a mat on a dirt floor in Grace's 1-room metal shack. But he was free, and to Grace, that mattered more than comfort. Age 5. Lucky should have started school, but the nearest school was 12 kilometers away, no bus, no car, no money for transport. Grace taught him what she could, reading from an old Bible, mathematics using stones and sticks. But Lucky was different. Teachers who met him later described it. abnormally focused, obsessively curious. When he wanted to understand something, he wouldn't stop until he mastered it completely. Psychologists later suggested this might have been psychological adaptation. The prison birth created unusual neural pathways, a mind that learned to find patterns in chaos, to create order from institutional disorder. Age 7. A missionary teacher named Sarah came to Lethabo running mobile education programs. She met Lucky and immediately noticed something unusual. This child, sitting in dirt, was solving mathematical problems in his head that most 10-year-olds couldn't solve with paper. She asked him how he learned this. He said, "Counting days, counting stones, counting everything. Numbers make sense. Everything else is confusing." Sarah did something remarkable. She convinced her organization to sponsor Lucky's education. They paid for him to attend a proper school in the nearest town, still 8 kilometers away, but now he walked it. Every morning at 5 a.m., Lucky walked 8 kilometers to school, barefoot most days because shoes wore out. After school, he worked at a local mechanics shop sweeping floors for food money, then walked 8 kilometers home, did homework by candlelight, slept 4 hours, repeated it all the next day for 6 years straight. Most kids would have quit. Lucky didn't know that was an option. Age 13. Lucky was top of his class despite having less than half the attendance of other students. He still had to work to eat. The school principal called him in, offered him something unprecedented, a full scholarship to a private boarding school in Johannesburg. For context, this school cost more per year than Grace earned in 5 years. It was where the children of politicians and business executives went. Lucky would be the only black student from a rural village, the only one born in prison, the only one who'd ever gone to bed hungry. He arrived with everything he owned in a plastic shopping bag, one change of clothes, a toothbrush, the Bible Grace had taught him to read from. The other students arrived in Mercedes and BMWs with suitcases full of designer clothes. The culture shock was profound. These kids talked about overseas vacations. Lucky had never been on an airplane. They complained about slow internet. Lucky had never used a computer. They threw away food. Lucky had spent years not knowing when his next meal would come. But here's what nobody expected. Lucky didn't crumble. He adapted. That prison birth brain that found patterns in chaos, it now found patterns in privilege. He observed everything. How wealthy people talked, how they networked, how they thought about money, opportunity, and risk. He didn't try to fit in. He studied them like a scientist studying a different species, and he outworked everyone. While they partied on weekends, Lucky was in the library. While they slept in, Lucky was studying before dawn, not because he loved school, because he knew this was his only shot at a different life. Age 16. Lucky discovered something that would change his trajectory: computers and coding. The school had a computer lab most students ignored. They had better computers at home. Lucky didn't. So he spent every free moment teaching himself programming. Started with basic HTML, moved to JavaScript, then Python, then languages most adults hadn't heard of. The computer science teacher found him in the lab at 2 a.m. one night, asked what he was doing. Lucky looked up and said, "Building something that will make me free." He was building a website, an e-commerce platform connecting rural South African craftspeople directly to international buyers. The teacher asked why. Lucky's answer was simple. "In my village, women make beautiful things, beadwork, baskets, carvings. They sell them to middlemen for nothing. The middlemen sell them to tourists for everything. The internet removes the middlemen. The women keep the money. Everyone wins except the exploiters." At 16 years old, this kid born in a maximum security prison was identifying market inefficiencies and building technological solutions. The platform launched in 2003. Lucky called it Ubuntu Market, named after the African philosophy of communal humanity. It started small, 5 craftspeople from Lethabo. Sales to a few international buyers found through forums. Lucky took 0 commission. He just wanted to prove the concept worked. Within 6 months, Ubuntu Market had 100 craftspeople. Within a year, 500. The international buyers loved it. Authentic African crafts, fair trade, direct connection to makers. The craftspeople loved it. They were earning 5 to 10 times what middlemen had paid them. Grace, who'd raised Lucky, was one of the first sellers. She made more in 3 months on Ubuntu Market than she'd made in 3 years as a domestic worker. She quit her job in Johannesburg, stayed in the village, expanded her craft business. Lucky had just liberated his mother from exploitation using code he'd taught himself in a school computer lab. Age 18, Lucky graduated top of his class, received admission offers from 6 universities, including 2 international scholarships. Everyone expected him to study computer science at MIT or Stanford, get out of South Africa, never look back. Lucky shocked everyone. He declined every foreign offer. Instead, he enrolled at the University of Cape Town, 20 minutes from Pollsmoor prison where he was born. When asked why, he said, "I'm not running from where I came from. I'm running toward where I'm going, and I'm bringing everyone with me." University of Cape Town, 2005. Lucky majored in computer science and economics, unusual combination. Most students picked one or the other. Lucky wanted both, the technical skills to build platforms and the economic knowledge to understand markets. He lived in the cheapest accommodation, ate 1 meal a day to save money, worked 3 part-time jobs while carrying a full course load, and he kept growing Ubuntu Market. By sophomore year, it had 2,000 craftspeople and was processing 6 figures annually in transactions. By senior year, it was 7 figures. But Lucky saw something bigger. Ubuntu Market was successful, but it was niche, craft products to tourists. What about everyone else? What about the millions of South Africans locked out of the formal economy, not because they lacked skills, but because they lacked access? Banks wouldn't give them accounts without addresses. Businesses wouldn't hire them without formal education. The system was designed to keep people like Lucky's mother trapped. Age 21, final year of university, Lucky built something new. He called it Access Network. It was a mobile-first financial technology platform designed specifically for the unbanked and underbanked. Here's what made it revolutionary. It didn't require traditional banking infrastructure. It used mobile phones, which even poor South Africans had. It didn't require formal addresses. It used GPS coordinates. It didn't require credit history. It used community-based trust networks. Lucky had just invented a parallel financial system for people the traditional system had abandoned. The big banks laughed at him, told him it would never work, told him poor people couldn't be trusted with financial access. Lucky launched it anyway. Bootstrapped. No venture capital, no bank loans. Just revenue from Ubuntu Market funding Access Network's development. The first month, 300 people signed up. Month 6, 10,000. Month 12, 100,000. The banks stopped laughing. Because Access Network didn't just work, it worked spectacularly. Default rates were lower than traditional banking, transaction volumes were massive. And most importantly, it was changing lives. A woman in Soweto used Access Network to save enough to start a food stand. A man in Durban used it to access microcredit to buy inventory for an electronics repair business. A teenager in Port Elizabeth used it to pay school fees in installments. These were people the traditional financial system had written off. Lucky had just proven they weren't risks, they were opportunities. Age 23, Lucky graduated with honors. Multiple tech companies offered him 6-figure salaries. Google wanted him. Microsoft wanted him. He declined them all. Instead, he moved back to Lethabo, the village that had raised him, rented a small office in the nearest town, hired his first 5 employees, all people from rural villages, all without traditional qualifications, all with hunger to prove they could do extraordinary things. Access Network was about to scale. Here's where the story accelerates. And if you've been following along thinking this is inspiring, but where's the $500 million and patience? Because what Lucky built next wasn't just a company. It was a revolution. Leave a comment if you're seeing how this connects, because the next phase is where everything changes. 2010, 2012, the expansion years. Access Network grew from 100,000 users to 5 million. Lucky raised his first institutional funding, $15 million from a South African venture capital firm, but he did something unusual with it. Most tech founders use VC money to move to expensive offices and hire expensive people. Lucky used it to build rural infrastructure, internet connectivity in villages, training programs for users, support centers in townships. He understood something Silicon Valley didn't. Technology alone doesn't create access. You need infrastructure, education, support. By 2013, Access Network was processing over $100 million annually in transactions. Banks that had laughed at Lucky were now trying to acquire the company. He refused every offer. This wasn't about an exit. This was about impact. Every metric proved it. Access network users saved more, borrowed responsibly, built businesses at rates far exceeding traditional banking customers. Lucky had proven that the poor weren't economically incompetent, they were systematically excluded. And when you removed the exclusion, they thrived. Age 26. Lucky expanded beyond financial services, launched Access Market, an e-commerce platform for informal traders, launched Access Learn, online education for skills training, launched Access Health, telemedicine for rural areas. Each platform addressed a different systematic barrier facing poor South Africans. Each platform used technology to remove middlemen, reduce costs, and increase access. And each platform was profitable, not from extracting value from users, but from transaction fees on massive volume. Access Network reached 20 million users. That's 1/3 of South Africa's entire population. The company was valued at $200 million. Lucky, now 28 years old, owned 65%. He was worth $130 million on paper. A child born in a maximum security prison was now wealthier than most of the families who'd hired Grace as their domestic worker. But Lucky still lived simply. Small apartment, old car, donated most of his income to education programs in rural villages. When journalists asked about his wealth, he said something profound. "I'm not rich, the company is valuable, there's a difference. My wealth only matters if it lifts others." The same year, Lucky did something that shocked the business community. He restructured Access Network's ownership, gave 20% of the company to a community trust controlled by users, the first time a tech company had given equity directly to its customers, gave another 10% to employees through broad-based ownership. He diluted himself from 65% to 35%. His financial advisors called it insane. Lucky called it justice. These people built this company with their trust and participation. They should share in its value. 2017-2018, international expansion. Access Network launched in Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, Tanzania. The model worked everywhere. Massive unbanked populations, high mobile penetration, systematic financial exclusion. Each market exploded. By 2018, Access Network had 60 million users across 6 African countries. Transaction volume exceeded $2 billion annually. The company raised $200 million in Series C funding at a $1.2 billion valuation. Lucky was now a billionaire on paper, except he'd given away so much equity that his personal stake was worth about $400 million. Major global financial institutions now wanted partnerships. JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, MasterCard, not to acquire Access Network, to learn from it. Because Lucky had proven something that disrupted traditional banking wisdom. The bottom of the pyramid wasn't a charity case. It was the largest underserved market in the world. And whoever served it well would build an empire. Age 31, 2018. Lucky received an invitation that brought everything full circle. The South African government asked him to speak at Pollsmoor Prison, where he'd been born 31 years earlier. They wanted him to address inmates about rehabilitation and opportunity. Lucky almost declined. The trauma of his birth, even though he didn't consciously remember it, was real. But Grace convinced him. Those men and women need to see that where you start doesn't determine where you finish. Lucky returned to Pollsmoor for the first time since he was 18 months old, walked through the same security checkpoints Grace had carried him through decades earlier, entered the same cell block where he'd been born. The warden showed him the exact cell, cell D47. Lucky stood in that 6-by-8-foot space, looking at the same concrete walls, the same metal bars, and he spoke to 200 inmates gathered in the prison yard. He didn't give them a motivational speech. He gave them truth. "I was born in cell D47 in this prison. The system didn't expect me to survive. When I did survive, it didn't expect me to succeed. When I succeeded anyway, it tried to explain me away as an exception. But I'm not an exception. I'm proof that the system is wrong about who deserves opportunity. Every single one of you has capabilities the system refuses to see. Your job isn't to accept what the system thinks of you. Your job is to prove the system wrong." The speech went viral. International media covered it. Forbes featured Lucky on their cover, from prison cell to $500 million empire. But Lucky hated the narrative. In every interview, he redirected. "This isn't a story about me being exceptional. This is a story about systems being wrong. Millions of people born into poverty have the same capabilities I do. They just don't get the same lucky breaks. The aunt who sacrificed everything, the teacher who noticed, the scholarship that appeared. The goal isn't to celebrate the one who escaped. The goal is to dismantle the barriers keeping everyone else trapped. 2019-2020. Access Network continued scaling, reached 100 million users, launched in 3 more African countries plus India and Bangladesh. Transaction volume hit $10 billion annually. The company's valuation reached $3 billion. Lucky's personal stake was worth approximately $500 million, though he donated shares worth over $200 million to the community trust and educational foundations. He'd built exactly what the title promised, a $500 million empire. But the empire's purpose wasn't wealth accumulation. It was systematic barrier destruction. And then 2020 brought COVID-19. While global financial systems struggled, Access Network thrived. Why? Because its users were already operating in informal economies, already using digital payments, already adapted to working outside traditional systems. Access Network processed more transactions in Q2 2020 than all of 2019. The pandemic proved Lucky's thesis. The formal economy was fragile. The informal economy, when properly supported with technology, was resilient. Lucky used the moment to launch Access Emergency, interest-free microcredit for users affected by COVID lockdowns. Over 5 million users borrowed an average of $50 each to survive. Repayment rates exceeded 96%. Traditional banks wouldn't have touched these risky borrowers. Access Network proved they weren't risky. They were reliable when treated with dignity and given fair terms. Today, Lucky is 37 years old. Access Network serves over 150 million users across 12 countries. The company is valued at over $5 billion. Lucky's personal wealth exceeds $500 million. But he still lives simply, still works 18-hour days, still visits Lethabo village regularly, still remembers where he came from, because forgetting would betray everyone who didn't get his opportunities. Grace, the aunt who saved him, now runs the Access Foundation, Lucky's charitable organization funding education and entrepreneurship in rural African communities. The foundation has built 47 schools, funded 70,000 scholarships, supported 12,000 small businesses. When asked about Lucky, Grace says he was always going to do something important. Even as a baby in that terrible place, he had something special, not luck, purpose. Nomsa, Lucky's biological mother, was released from Pollsmoor in 1993 after serving her full sentence. By then, Lucky was 6 and living with Grace. Nomsa struggled with reintegration, addiction, homelessness. Lucky found her in 2015, when he was 28 and Access Network was already successful. He moved her into a rehabilitation facility, funded her treatment, gave her a job at the Access Foundation when she was ready. Their relationship is complicated. Decades of separation created distance that money and opportunity can't completely heal, but they're building something. Slowly, carefully. Lucky was asked once, "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you hadn't been born in prison?" His answer was profound, every single day. And then I remember that prison birth is why I understand systematic exclusion. It's why I recognize barriers others can't see. It's why I'm obsessed with building solutions for people the system has abandoned. Would I have chosen to be born there? Never. But would I trade what that experience taught me about injustice and resilience? Also, never. The trauma is real. But so is the purpose it created. The loop is complete. Remember how this started? A baby crying in a maximum security prison cell. No one expected him to survive. No one expected him to succeed. No one expected him to build a $500 million empire. He did all three. Not because he was exceptional, though he is. Not because he got lucky, though he did. But because he refused to accept that his starting point determined his destination, and because he built systems to ensure others wouldn't have to be as lucky as he was to succeed. If this story changed how you think about potential, poverty, and possibility, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear that starting points don't determine endpoints. And in the comments, answer this. What barrier in your own life feels insurmountable? Because Lucky's story proves that insurmountable is just another word for hasn't been solved yet. He was born in a maximum security prison cell. No one expected he'd build a $500 million empire. But he did. And if that's possible, What else is possible? That's the real question, and the answer might change your life.